Hang on, I should change my background.
Hello.
I have to remember to look at the camera.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, Andy.
How are you?
Good.
Good. How are you?
Doing so well.
How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. Welcome to Conversations with Writers, a retrospective. I'm Andy, I'm a writer, and to celebrate another year of the series, in this video, I'm going to read some of my favorite pieces by some of the writers we've interviewed this year and talk about some of the things I like best about these texts. Links to the text I'm referencing are listed in the video description box, along with timestamps for easy navigation. The Final Rose is a dinner theater performance, so I'm not able to show you the play itself, but with permission from Sock and Buskin Theater Company, I can show you some images from the productions and provide a brief summary of the play that doesn't give away the ending. So let's pop into it. The Final Rose is a comedy murder mystery that takes place at S&B Productions during the taping of the series finale of a dating show called The Catch. In it, Brad, a handsome and charming librarian, must choose between easily excitable but sweet Southern belle Kelly Dixon or stunning, wealthy, but vain socialite Miranda Carter. As Brad struggles with his decision between the ladies, the production staff, Rebecca Cook, Kari Reynolds, and Bob, must navigate threats to the studio, cast personality clashes, and sleazy host Wes Gould's aggressive flirtations and peanut butter addiction. A couple of the things that I really like about this play is the way that the audience is integrated and also character complexity. Dinner theater is quite a difficult thing to do, especially when you have to account for the audience. This play is not so interactive that someone who isn't a performer wouldn't be comfortable sitting through the production. So the premise is you are both the audience for the play itself and the studio audience for the final episode of this dating TV show called The Catch. So your expected behavior as the audience is the same with both production ideas. You'll applaud when you're supposed to, you'll laugh when you're supposed to, that kind of thing. So as the audience, you are watching both the last episode of The Catch and what's meant to be shown on film, but also you're witnessing what happens during commercial breaks. So this feels like a seamless integration, especially when you have Kari's character coming up with cue cards that says things like applause. This helps reinforce that idea and sort of prepares the audience for when the actors start visiting tables after the murder has occurred. And as far as character development, none of these characters are wholly good or wholly bad. They are very complex people and behave as complex people do. For example, Wes Gould, he's the host of the TV show The Catch, so we have some expectations from him. We expect him to be charismatic, and he is, but that is also complicated with his aggressive flirtations on and off screen. No one is safe, not even the contestant's mother. There are no boundaries with Wes. But he also has this peanut butter addiction that seems to be causing problems both on and off the stage. And that leads the audience to wonder, is he trying to fill some kind of void? The character Kari on the production team, she is a recent graduate from college. She's politically active, and she has a difficult time with the premise of this particular show and is quite vocal about it. Could she be a possible saboteur? But it's also her first job out of college, and she's on the very bottom of the totem pole. Bob doesn't have any lines, but he sees everything that goes on stage and behind the scenes. The adage is, you've got to watch the quiet ones. Could he possibly be responsible for murder? What about Brad, the contestant on the show? He doesn't really seem like he wants to be there, and he was forced in by his mom. Is he so desperate to be out of the contract that he might resort to murder? Or how about his mom, Colleen? She's a bit of a social climber and clearly overly protective of her son. Could she be the murderer? What about Rebecca, the head of the production team? She's not super thrilled about the anti-feminist elements of this genre of TV, and everything seems to be standing in her way, making her job more complicated. And she also has her own romantic entanglements to deal with. Could she possibly be a murderer? The character complexity in this particular play keeps the audience guessing right up until the end. So these are some of the things that I like about this particular piece. What strikes you about this piece or another piece by this author? Tell me in the comments below. I'll be reading a chapter from Halfdollar by Bill Lepp. This is his first fiction novel, and it's a coming-of-age story that follows Edison Jansen. He's the son of a preacher. We meet him when he's 5 years old, and this novel takes place in rural West Virginia in the 1970s. I'm going to start with the second chapter. The only thing that you need to know up front is that Deacon is a dog, and we're in a small town in rural West Virginia. Mrs. Crankberry is the single meanest woman I have ever met, Reverend Jansen told Shani Jansen, Edison's mother. That's a bold statement coming from a man who, for the past 15 years, has served on church committees, she commented dryly. Mrs. Crankberry lived in the house next door to the Jansens. The old woman hated little kids and had made life miserable for Edison ever since he dug up her flower garden with a Tonka truck. Because she was so evil, Mrs. Crankberry, through some twist of universal irony or the great yin-yang, had the single greatest backyard ever created. The boy coveted the gentle slope, the flowing waters, the flora of her yard. To her yard he sang his toddler song of Solomon, but her yard was merely an unattainable dream. Edison would stare at it for hours. The yard was a Four Seasons resort to a 5-year-old. For starters, it bordered a tributary to Skitter Creek, the best crawdad, salamander, and rope-swinging creek within walking distance of Edison's house. The creek lay on the opposite side of Mrs. Crankberry's yard, and so was all but inaccessible to Edison because Mrs. Crankberry wouldn't let anyone cross her domain. Her yard also boasted a winter sledding slope that was second to none in the neighborhood, where the virgin snow that accumulated each year stayed religiously unmolested. And finally, there was an oak tree in her yard that produced bushels and bushels of acorns annually. Acorns are critical to the tactical weapon systems of any 5-year-old, pacifists included. But God helped the child that tried to access the great Crankberry acorn arsenal. "Get your scrawny butt out of my yard, you pipsqueak," she screamed if she ever saw Edison in her yard. The child had good reason to be scared. This was, after all, the 1970s, when it was still legal to hurt children. But this did not deter him. "I want that yard," Edison whispered to himself again and again. "Why is she so mean?" he asked his mother. "She's got nothing in the world. No family, no friends. All she has is her house. As she sees it, nobody gives her anything, so she won't give anything away. Not even the pleasure of her yard, as long as she can help it. We could be her friends. She won't let us." "Why not? Edison, you're too young to get this." But she had a very hard life. Everybody always took stuff from her. Not just her belongings, but her happiness. So she won't let anybody be her friend now, because she's scared they'll take something. That's weird. It's just the way some people are. I bet she'd be less mean if she didn't have a beehive on her head. Mrs. Jansen laughed. "It's not a beehive. It's just a hairstyle called a beehive." Jerry said that Mrs. Crankberry has her hair fixed twice a year. Jerry was Edison's oldest brother. And that she has a beehive put in her hair. And then she has the whole thing sealed with concrete. Jerry was joking. "Is she related to Mr. McGregor from Peter Cottontail?" His mother chuckled. "Best just to stay out of her yard, Edison." Then one day, Edison got an idea. He watched, and when he saw Mrs. Crankberry leave her house, get into her car, and drive away, he saw his chance. He jumped up and ran into Mrs. Crankberry's yard, got down on his hands and knees, and started sniffing around the base of the great oak tree. Edison didn't know exactly what he was sniffing for, but he knew from watching Deacon that sniffing was an integral element in the acquisition of land. Having sniffed sufficiently, he stood, dropped his pants, and peed on the big old oak tree, thereby making it his. As he zipped his fly, it occurred to Edison that he had never once seen Mrs. Crankberry pee on that tree, so he wasn't even sure that that tree belonged to her in the first place. Edison knew, deep in his young heart, that the tree was now his, as was the yard. He had sniffed and peed in the proper dog fashion, and Edison dared Mrs. Crankberry or anyone else to try to take his land away. The boy vowed that if he ever caught Mrs. Crankberry peeing on his tree, he would convert to Deacon's religion and fight. He did decide, however, that he would practice Christian charity and allow Mrs. Crankberry to stay on his land. From that day on, Edison snuck into Mrs. Crankberry's yard as often as possible, whizzing on the tree, the bird bath, the garage wall, and anything else that proved handy. And then, One day, Mrs. Crankberry died. Edison quickly decided that her death and his peeing could not in any way be related. It was pure coincidence. And he wasn't sad. He didn't totally understand death, but he knew Mrs. Crankberry wasn't coming back. And that jived with his father's idea that through God, all things worked out in the end. With Mrs. Crankberry gone, Edison could think of no reason not to expand his domain and claim her entire house as his own. He delivered enough urine onto her old house to float an aircraft carrier. Thus, it came as quite a shock when one day he returned from the grocery store with his mother, only to discover a moving van in front of Mrs. Crankberry's house. People were hefting furniture into his house. He had claimed it. To top it off, in the backyard, Edison discovered a boy, about his own age, placing toys all over the yard. Edison's duly claimed yard. He felt both concerned and offended. Hadn't these people bothered to sniff? Well, Edison resolved, I know what I gotta do. He walked straight over to the big oak tree, dropped his shorts to his ankles, and commenced to taking a leak while the new kid wandered about. The new kid stopped and eyed him curiously, then sauntered over to the tree, dropped his pants, and let loose. Well, that was just too much. The nerve of him, peeing in my territory, Edison said to himself. He knew what Deacon would do. He slugged the kid in the eye as hard as he could. The kid hit back, and both boys started crying and shouting and throwing punches like tiny madmen. Deacon ran over and started barking. Edison's mother, and then the new boy's mother, soon followed Deacon. The mothers separated the boys, two babies with their pants around their ankles fighting to the death. You two apologize to each other, the mothers yelled. The boys clung to their respective mothers, bawling their eyes out and pulling up their pants. Edison's mother looked at the new kid's mother and said, My name's Shani Jansen. I'm sorry about this. Mary Barth, said the kid's mother, offering her hand. Well, boys will be boys, they agreed. Mrs. Jansen and Mrs. Barth made the two boys shake hands and apologize. Edison mumbled, I'm sorry. Me too, grumbled the kid, not sure what he was sorry about. Introduce yourself, Mrs. Jansen commanded her son. Edison felt like he knew the kid pretty well by this point. You punch a kid and pee on him, and he does the same to you. What else is there to know? I'm Edison, he said. Skeeter Barth. The two boys looked into each other's eyes, and though their mothers did not see it, a mischievous, knowing nod was exchanged. As if they were saying to each other, you and me, pal, you and me. They would be friends, and Halfdollar, West Virginia would never be the same. After dinner that night, Edison's mother and father came up to his room. Mrs. Jansen asked, Why were you boys fighting? It was the sort of thing Edison was slowly learning, which interested parents. He was finding his parents' curiosity stranger by the day. The more questionable the act he committed, the more they were interested in why he had done it. But their response was always the same. It did not seem to matter to them what justification he offered for any given act. His parents always countered by telling him that he was wrong and that he should not have done whatever he had done. There was no getting out of anything. There was only confession and forced, insincere penance on Edison's part. Truths, lies, and a 5-year-old sense of ethics meant nothing to his parents. Edison, his mother asked, Why were you two fighting? He tried to pee on me. No, his dad said absolutely. We talked to his mother. She was watching and saw you walk over and pee on the tree first. Well, his mother was looking at him. Well, Edison carefully constructed a pointless defense. Dad told me that the reason Deacon pees on trees is to let other dogs know that it's his tree and his yard. Just before Mrs. Crankberry died, I started going next door every day to pee on the tree and the yard. The corners of Shani Jensen's mouth, despite her obvious efforts, lifted just perceptibly toward a smile. Edison picked up the shift in his parents' attitude and hastily continued. I like that yard, and I wanted it. I just did what Deacon does. I marked my territory. So those people shouldn't have moved in. Edison's mother's gaze shifted from Edison to his father. There was mirth in his father's eyes. Edison was confused, but rode what seemed to be a good vibe. So that kid was trying to take over my yard. Dad said that Deacon would fight any dog that came into our yard, so I had to fight Skeeter. It sounded reasonable as far as he was concerned. Reverend Jansen acted as though he had been struck dumb. Yes, well, that being as it may, don't fight anymore. It's wrong. Edison watched his folks turn and quickly leave his room, shutting the door behind them. He heard his mom say, George, why did you tell the boy about dogs peeing on trees? His dad chuckled. I didn't want to lie to him, and the biology of the whole thing seemed pretty harmless at the time. My goodness, George, you already raised 2 sons. you should know that there are few biological subjects that are safe in the hands of a growing boy. Edison wasn't exactly sure what had just happened, but he knew he wasn't in trouble. He wasn't supposed to fight over yard ownership anymore, but his mom and dad had not said anything about marking territory. He had anticipated much more trouble from the incident, but wasn't going to beg for it. So one of the things that I like most about this book is its flexibility. While yes, it functions as a novel to help introduce us to this character, Edison, and the place in which he's growing up, the majority of these chapters can stand on their own as sufficient stories that make sense from beginning to end. So while the excerpt that I read was from chapter 2, that section still functions on its own as a complete story, which would make it great for teaching. And one of the things that I found most challenging when I was teaching something like an introduction to creative writing course where we cover 3 genres, fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, it can be quite difficult to get students to create a bridge to pull that information forward as we move through different genres. So what generally makes the most sense to me when setting up a multi-genre course is to go with something that's familiar with students first. So open with nonfiction, it's likely something that they've encountered. They have stories that they can tell, and they may even have encountered personal narrative writing in something like Introduction to Composition. So I generally start with nonfiction because this is something that students are familiar with. They know their own stories, they can tell their own stories. They've been doing it since they could talk. And then we move into fiction, which has a relationship to nonfiction, but you don't have to tell the truth, and there's less red tape when you're inventing a story. So this is slightly out of their comfort zone. And then we finish off with poetry, which is something that largely many of them are not familiar with. So this is often the thing that scares the hell out of them. But I find when I'm transitioning the course from nonfiction to fiction, sometimes there's a little bit of a gap. The students struggle to pull the techniques that we've learned forward. And that's what I really like about this section in Halfdollar and the text as a whole. It's a strong text that borrows heavily from nonfiction storytelling techniques and combines them with this fiction element. So one of the things that I tend to teach when I'm teaching creative nonfiction is to root the story in a situation. And when you're writing something like a coming of age piece, depending on the span of time that you want to tackle, it can be difficult to navigate the story. So rooting the story in a situation can help us create more complete segments. And I think that's what this story does really well. It borrows ideas that we teach in creating creative nonfiction and pulls them forward into the fiction zone. So if you're teaching a multi-genre course and your sequence moves from creative nonfiction into fiction, this can be a good bridge, especially since it's a nice light story, and a lot of what gets published in the anthologies in the fiction sections are quite heavy. And when you're teaching a class 2 or 3 days a week and every assignment, students have a really heavy story with perhaps triggering content, that can exhaust them. And to keep that momentum going, I've found more success by balancing the heavier pieces with things that are a little lighter, especially when we talk about specific techniques. So if there's something that I want them to pull forward from the nonfiction section and use that and build on it for their fiction writing, like rooting things in situation to help navigate the story and page space more effectively, then pulling in a piece like this helps act as an effective bridge, because you're still rooting everything in the situation, but now instead of using a first-person perspective, we're using a third-person limited perspective, which still creates some boundaries. So there are still some things, as if we're looking primarily through the perspective of a 5-year-old boy, that he's not going to have access to about his parents' thoughts or other people's thoughts in regards to something like his decision to pee on a tree and another little boy, right? But it makes for really good conflict, and that conflict doesn't have to be super heavy. And I might even pair it with something like a writing prompt that helps highlight these aspects for students. So not every story that we tell in a fiction setting has to be quite so heavy. And a writing prompt that might help demonstrate this for students for themselves and also be a good springboard for conversation might be something like, write a scene where 2 neighbors meet for the first time. Who are these characters? Where are they? And what does that first interaction look like? This kind of prompt focuses on situation and highlights potential conflict. And any good story, regardless of whether it's fiction or nonfiction, requires conflict. And that helps reinforce to students that they don't have to completely reconstruct a new world in order to create a successful story, to create a successful fiction story. It can have a lot of similarities to what they already know. And I think when students are first starting out in fiction writing, it's helpful to remind them to write what they know. Although chapter 2, where Skeeter and Edison meet for the first time, is a quite lighthearted conflict, this author does also tackle more sensitive issues like race, abuse, and assault. The way that this author handles them and delivers this from the perspective of Edison is a lot more digestible than some of the things that we might otherwise see anthologized in craft textbooks. So assigning sections from a book like this can help ease us into a productive discussion of larger issues that students might want to tackle in their own writing. So these are some of the things that I like best about this particular piece. What strikes you about this piece or another piece by this author? Tell me in the comments below. This is called The Challenge, and it's one of Andrew Maust's award-winning poems. The Challenge. Deep in the bowels of the bursting metropolis of Newark, New Jersey, in the back of Benny's Gas and Go, a man can find a challenge. And I, unwittingly, unaware of what ordeals I may encounter, made the fateful choice to stop at Benny's Gas and Go, deep in the bowels of Newark, New Jersey. And at 2:30, 3 hours past my normal lunchtime, I found myself staring at this humble abode, sharing its roof with the typical gas station flair of grilled wieners and chili. This little-known secret of Northeastern Americana goodness, an establishment known as thick burritos and sushi. But it was not the Frankensteinian hybridization of Oriental flair and bastardized Tex-Mex that caught my eye, but a laminated poster, a challenge. Eat the monster burrito and eat for free, it provoked in taunting letters that were the same color as one of the colors of Joseph's coat of many colors. That is, the same color that flows inside you and me, the color of anger, of passion, of red, the color of challenge. And be one traveler, long I stood and stared at this sign until I resigned and flexed my bowels and girded my loins and let out a preemptive belch to move forward and accept this challenge. The waiter smirked as I sat down and ordered the monster. I could feel disdain oozing from his eyes like ketchup oozing from a crushed packet. I ordered a large root beer and settled down for my odyssey, my epic journey to the underworld of urban New Jersey. Surely, years to come, bards and poets and Garth Brooks clones would sing about the deeds and feats I would perform this day. Surely songs and plays and Taco Bell commercials would be written about this challenge. The burrito came forth, not lying flat on a plate, but standing erect, upright, like a phallic monument to a $1 president. Like Kilimanjaro, rising like Olympus above the Serengeti, I saw the monster burrito, the size of an obese possum, its innards nearly bursting from the pale shell of the floured tortilla that struggled to contain its contents. And I raised my fork, my Narsil, my Excalibur, my Mjolnir, my Tizona, my Master Sword, my Amaracchius, my Old Betsy, my Rindon, my Dragon Lance, my Gunblade, my Zarok, my Sword of Gryffindor, my sword that my father crafted for the Six-Finger Man, and I plunged it into my foe, my monster burrito. Like a lightsaber effortlessly cutting into a frozen tauntaun, I tore through the monumental mockery of Mexican cuisine and masticated my morsel. It burned, but not like fire, but like Uncle Danny's custom chili curry picante hot powder, and left me yearning for something cool and wet, and otherwise the opposite of Uncle Danny's custom chili curry picante powder. It burned, but not like an impatient Boy Scout's marshmallow turning black as it oozes with soot-covered boils, bursting with white marshmallow pus. It burned like a pea of wasabi, snorted in a baffling and ambitious attempt to impress a new acquaintance of the opposite sex. But I was no stranger to spice. Had I not eaten 12 pounds of crawfish in the Louisiana June heat? Had I not consumed 10 servings of Jamaican jerk chicken outside New Orleans? Had I not sweated through each hot, very spicy rating dish at India Pavilion? I stared at the monster, the Kraken from the bowels of Newark, New Jersey, and through watering eyes, I took another bite, and as I chewed, it expanded, growing in my mouth like an unintended double entendre. But I swallowed, and bit by bit, the burrito disappeared, my jaw unhinging like a boa constrictor, as I mindlessly scarfed down this toddler-sized bundle of agony. Like a dumpster-diving chipmunk, my cheeks filled with burrito as I struggled to chew. I used the root beer to soften the gobbet and swallowed the sweet and spicy mush. After an hour and 53 minutes, I was nearly to the end of my journey. The once mighty chimera lay emaciated on my plate. There were only a few scraps left. Alas, that the voyage had ended there, that I had waited a few minutes to sit and rest, and not in my folly pressed forward, eager to defeat this challenge. For then, like a space shuttle burrowing into the earth, my meal began traveling in the opposite direction than it was intended to travel. My throat clenched as I felt a rising, disturbingly familiar sensation of my stomach wrenching, violently throwing its contents skyward, like an optimistic Jets quarterback in the fourth quarter. Like a teenager playing ding-dong ditch, I bolted, and I ran toward the bathroom, a single-stall facility shared with Benny's Gas & Go, left unclean since 2004. What horrors this toilet had seen did nothing to prepare it for what was to come. My face was pale and clammy, knees weak, arms were heavy. There was vomit in the toilet already. Mom's spaghetti. And like Mount Vesuvius spewing its molten contents over Pompeii, I also spewed chunks of meat, and beans and burning sauce, on the once white, now gray and beige, porcelain shell of the toilet. And I rested, and I breathed, and did not care that my tear-streaked face was pressed into the crusty rim of the toilet. Like Hector outside of the city of Troy, I had fallen. It was over. I returned to the table and stared at the plate, smeared with sauce and refried beans. On the table lay a check, a declaration of surrender. I soddenly walked, feeling dirty and used like Icarus, having flown too close to the monster burrito, but I know I will return. As Aristotle said, expellence is a habit, not an act. For deep in the bowels of the bursting metropolis of Newark, New Jersey, in the back of Benny's Gas & Go, a man can find a challenge. One of the things that I like best about this piece is the way that the author satirizes the epic poem genre. An epic poem has a few requirements. Generally, it is about a man, a hero, a warrior, who is taking on a particular challenge and going on a journey. And through that journey, we expect our hero to show his virility, ability for leadership, and there's generally some kind of challenge or monster that our hero has to defeat. In this poem, we have a man, our hero, or in this case, possibly an anti-hero, going on a journey, and his nemesis, or his monster in this case, is food. And this author modernizes the idea of an epic poem to better suit a contemporary audience. So we have our hero, and he's accepted this food challenge at a truck stop. We see him tearing through the burrito. He's finished it. We think he's won. Then suddenly he's feeling nauseous, and he heads to the bathroom, where he then encounters another challenge, but he doesn't care. He's puking in this disgusting toilet anyhow. So our hero is in some ways defeated. And even the restaurant staff knows this, because when he gets back to the table, he is presented with a bill. And this makes our main character much more relatable than the typical hero character that exists within a conventional epic poem. The author does incorporate phallic imagery, but in this case, it's not so much a sword as it is a fork. But he creates those parallels between those two objects, which is quite funny. We also get repetition of language and phrasing to help emphasize the cyclical nature of the journey. So these are some of the things I like best about this particular piece. What strikes you about this piece or another piece by this author? Tell me in the comments below. This is called 5 Ingredients to Add Flavor to Any Dish, and it's a blog post by Thomas Ensor. 5 Ingredients to Add Flavor to Any Dish. Ever get bored of eating the same old thing, but not sure what to change to make it more interesting? Here's a short list of some simple ingredients you can add to any recipe to spice it up. 1. Chipotle peppers and adobo sauce. This one's a double whammy. Not only is this little can shelf stable, inside are 2 extremely powerful flavoring agents. The chipotle peppers offer a good kick of heat, with a lot of smokiness and can be added whole to stocks and sauces or chopped up and added to salsas, dips, or really whatever you want. The adobo sauce offers a ton of smokiness as well, but not as much of that pepper heat. This can be used instead of the peppers if you want to decrease the heat in any recipe. And coming in at just $1 per can, this ingredient is a great thing to pick up and keep in the cupboard to liven things up a bit. 2. Mushrooms. Coming in all shapes, sizes, and varieties, mushrooms are a great way to add flavor, texture, and even color to a dish. First are the ubiquitous button and bell mushrooms, which you can find in any grocery store. They provide savory, umami flavors to any dish and a succulent snap, even if you cook them to death. Then, if you want to shake things up a bit, there's a whole world of more exotic gourmet mushrooms that exist. From the multitude of oysters, including pink, blue, gold, king, and trumpet, to lion's mane and winecap. The list of mushrooms goes on and on. Each different kind of mushroom offers different textures, flavors, and colors. There's a whole exciting world of umami flavors, packed fungus to explore. Side note, if you don't like the mushrooms but still want to take advantage of their savory umami boosting power, check out mushroom seasoning or powder. 3. Acids. Acids, like the things that dissolve through stuff, kind of, but not really. What I'm talking about here is acidic foods, especially things like lemon juice, lime juice, and vinegar. Adding these kinds of ingredients in small amounts doesn't make food sour or too acidic, but helps to bring contrast to a dish. Squeezing some fresh lemon or lime juice on top of vegetables or adding a splash of vinegar into a sauce can really liven up a dish. In addition, there are all kinds of juices and vinegars with their own flavors that you can add to add another note of complexity to any dish. Orange and grapefruit juice can be used instead of lemon or lime juice. For vinegars, there are wine vinegars like red, white, and champagne, to all sorts of different kinds of seasoned and flavored vinegars. Don't be afraid to experiment and add a splash of something acidic to your next meal. 4. Seasoning blends. Most grocery stores I've been to have all sorts of different seasoning blends packed onto the shelves next to individual spices. From the more basic, like lemon pepper and curry powder, to unique and specialized blends for different kinds of meats and cooking methods. Each of these blends packs in tons of flavor in one small package. Picking up a few blends creates a huge variety of flavor. If you ever get bored of what you're eating, I recommend to check out some of these and see what kind of interesting flavors you can come across. 5. Stock. Vegetable, chicken, beef, shrimp, etc. If a recipe ever calls for water, try adding some stock to bump up the flavor. Stocks and broths are water with flavor components already dissolved into it. So if you're ever stuck wondering how to make those boiled or steamed vegetables a little more interesting, consider adding to or replacing that water with some stock. One of the things that I really like about this particular blog post is the way that it considers the audience's resources and constraints. A likely reader of this particular blog might be an undergraduate college student, someone who has moved out of the dorms and is possibly living on their own or in an apartment for the first time. Money is a bit of an issue. So having something like item number 1, the chipotle peppers and adobo sauce, on the list is really important because it is so versatile and also very affordable. Likely, this particular audience isn't a super proficient cook. Perhaps they're just learning to cook for themselves for the first time. Maybe they have a handful of recipes that they're relatively good at, but now they want to add something that's going to take them out of flavor boredom. And the suggestions that Thomas gives us are affordable and something that we can easily incorporate into existing dishes for recipes that we already know. It also moves quickly, which is an advantage for a digital reading space. Since reading on a screen pushes the audience to read much faster, we also have to consider attention span. So incorporating clearly marked headings makes it easier for the audience to navigate through the draft, especially if they want to reference back to something. Having those subheadings with enumerated items helps us to return to the document a little bit more easily in the specific section that we're looking for. So these are some of the things that I like best about this particular piece. What strikes you about this piece or another piece by this author? Tell me in the comments below. This is a review by Megan Reilley, and it's called The Body is Home, Traversing Gender to Find Peace. I stand in line at the pharmacy and wait my turn. I can see that the regular pharmacist is in, but there is a new associate helping customers. I dread the change that will inevitably take place when I finally reach the counter. I like it when the curly-haired, soft, motherly pharmacy associate helps me. She doesn't make me repeat my child's dead name. She remembers it and asks only for a birth date to confirm that she's looking at the right one of my 4 children in the computer system. I appreciate this small mercy. Obtaining a vial of testosterone in this sleepy mountain town is not an anonymous task. We initially filled the prescription at the specialty gender clinic in a city an hour and a half away. The same day we were taught about safe injection technique, and my 15-year-old self-administered their first testosterone dose. I have a photo of that moment, relief and joyous disbelief and something else, peace, on my child's face, spilling out from the corners of their smile. Eventually, I had to bring the prescription to the national pharmacy chain next to my local grocery store. There was explaining to do, identification to show, pronouns and dead names to trip over. In the time since, the friendly associate has researched needle types and sizes to procure the style my kid prefers, answered questions about insurance coverage and Sharp's disposal, and personally called competing pharmacies to locate the correct testosterone suspension when it couldn't be ordered in her store. She quickly noticed my use of pronouns in our discussion, and she uses the correct ones. Every time. Every time. I am grateful for this much greater mercy. A true and easy kindness in a world that seems intent on forcing my non-binary child's obedient conformity. Today, the kind associate is not here, and I worry. I worry, and I thank the universe that my child, whose body is always a question, isn't with me on this errand. We are bound up in this, the journey of transition, an act of becoming, as we were once bound when this child was growing inside me. They do not need to, once again, bear witness to the probing questions of strangers who see only the facts of the body and not the nuances of personhood. Chris Malcolm Belk understands the questions demanded of a non-binary body, a body that defies category or moves among them. In his memoir, The Natural Mother of the Child, Belk takes us on a journey intent on the facts of his body. Through essays and artifacts, Belk chronicles his childhood in Rockaway Beach, New York, his college years when he met his wife, Anna, and his early adulthood as a parent who carried one of the couple's 3 children. It is this act, carrying and giving birth to his son Samson, that ultimately confirms a fact Belk has always known and has been tentatively stepping toward throughout his life. He is not a woman. His memoir is a masterclass in nonconformity, taking readers through a reflection on his own understanding of his gender and his body. It begins with the story of when, as a 5-year-old, Belk simply stood on stage as the music played for a dance performance. The audience, quote, waiting for me to do what I'm supposed to do, end quote. He proceeds through life pushing the boundaries of conformity, often to the detriment of his mental and physical health. As Belk considers the various iterations of his gender presentation, he holds our hands and helps us understand that his journey is anchored around this understanding. Quote, some people may have been born in the wrong body. I was not. I was born in a body that gave me the freedom to carry a baby. End quote. Books by and about gender-diverse people are slowly making their way to the front of bookstores and the top of internet search results, but they are published infrequently. Rarely have I found a memoir as wide-ranging as Belk's, one that, rather than focusing on an explicit move from one gender to another, explores the spectrum of a gendered identity and what it means to move through the world and through relationships as your understanding of your own body shifts. In The Natural Mother of the Child, Belk considers his life through the lens of wisdom after Samson's birth, after he's been on testosterone, after he's researched top surgery. He has moved through the liminal space of pregnancy and childbirth, now inextricably linked to the boy he made and grew with his body, and landed squarely on trans masculinity. The kids are older, and Belk's family, which started as a same-sex partnership, navigated a system that required each to adopt the other's biological children, and underwent Belk's transition together, now presents as heteronormative. Quote, no one asks anymore. We are just a mom and a dad and some kids, end quote. He juxtaposes birth certificates, photos, and court documents that insist upon his female identity, with essayistic chapters exploring fatherhood, anger, breasts, adoption, and marriage, reconciling the paper trail of his life. Before the paper trail of my child's life aligned with their authentic self, my child didn't have the language to explain the discord between body and mind. They could not recognize the person in the mirror, and they were unrecognizable to me. My once playful and dynamic child receded. They were unmoored, adrift, seeking. Before trips to the pharmacy every few months for testosterone, There were trips to the pharmacy for medications to help with the maelstrom inside my child's head. Those early prescription labels bore a different name, one that has faded into the recesses of my mind. Before testosterone, my child's gender left people who knew them wondering. Before Belk had the language to articulate his understanding of his gender, he too existed in the in-between, in a body that was, quote, not quite man, not quite woman, but with the parts to create and shape life, end quote. And at no point in the life is the body more on display than when it is pushed to its limits during a pregnancy. Every person who has been pregnant knows that strangers will feel an entitlement to your body, as if it is suddenly a communal thing. They will want to know how far along you are, if they can touch your belly, whether you know the sex of the baby. Long before birth, we foster a culture that enables a sense of entitlement to others' gender identity, as every non-binary or trans person can attest. Why this need to categorize, to define? Belk puzzles through the personal meaning of that question in The Natural Mother of the Child, providing readers with a real-life accounting of the evolution of his transmasculine identity, and what it means to traverse both sides of the gender binary while embracing, though not particularly enjoying, experiences as deeply enmeshed with womanhood as pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding. In the pain of being a non-binary person occupying traditionally female spaces, such as the obstetrician's office or the ultrasound examining room, it is acute in Belk's refusal of a bevy of invasive tests that go along with pregnancy management. Quote, people like me don't get pelvic exams unless under the threat of something, end quote. Belk writes, quote, I didn't want to see those parts, women's parts, and know they were abnormal or normal or even there, end quote. This particular scrutiny and the physical changes of pregnancy led Belk to consider how he will relate to this new life, that of the baby he is carrying, as well as a life as a gestational parent, traditionally a mother, which he is not. Belk thoughtfully asks of himself and of society, what makes a mother, and why? Pushing into the question of whether the act of growing a human is or must be intrinsically female, noting, quote, nothing about being pregnant made me feel feminine, end quote. If pregnancy changes a person, which it invariably does, it changes Belk's understanding of himself and what he needed to be the most authentic version of himself. Belk weaned Samson and pursued testosterone therapy 2 years after giving birth. Yet, even as his appearance grew increasingly masculine, he was surprised by his children's perception of who he is. Samson, a boy at ease in sparkling shoes and rainbow skirts and suits of armor, points out a way in which he is similar to his dad, as children often do in search of themselves in their parents. Quote, it's good that your mom is the type of mom who let you wear dresses, end quote, Samson says. Quote, even though you were a boy, end quote. Belk corrects him. Quote, no, remember, when I was that age, she thought I was a girl, end quote. Belk offers a keen observation on the trade-offs associated with transition. Quote, there are things one gains by transitioning and things one loses. There is the new body, the confidence. There is the title, dad, the power granted to men. And there is what one loses, the assumption of connection, end quote. His words feel adjacent to remorse when he notes, quote, I didn't know I'd have to be a dad, end quote. Pressed by his son to say when he talked with his mom about his gender, Belk is ashamed of his late transition. Quote, there is no way to tell our child that I pretended to be somebody I wasn't until he came along, for everyone else's comfort, end quote. I understand the peace that can be found in a vial. I watched my child shrink and almost disappear, then emerge a more accurate version of themselves. Testosterone is not so that others may become comfortable with a non-binary body. It is so the person living in that body can become comfortable. Belk examines far more than his own relationship to his gender. He interrogates key relationship with his parents, partner, siblings, and children, to question the gender expectations ingrained in them and illustrate the changes inherent in transitioning genders. We come to understand how incredibly complex the non-binary is, not only for the person conditioned to believe they must be either or, but for the people who love them. Throughout his debut memoir, Belk often directly addresses his wife Anna, or occasionally his mother. He intentionally grants the reader access to thoughts not intended for us, but for those closest to him. In breaking the fourth wall, Belk is speaking to the reader as well, forcing us to consider the questions and circumstances he encounters on his complicated journey. He does not let us off the hook with such retrospective declarations as this one, directed to Anna. Quote, I know you love the self I walked away from, the peace Samson took with him on the way out, end quote. It is the many intensely vulnerable moments like this one that, as a mother who has been deep in my child's transition, made me connect to this work. Belk is wistful at times, sorrowful at others, as when he addresses his mother to ask whether she has ever seen him as his authentic self, a boy, a son. Quote, I look at pictures of me as a baby and wonder if you ever knew you were photographing the wrong face, not a daughter's face. Do you look at those pictures and see me? End quote. Or his admission that his memories of his father are mostly memories of his father's anger. He later notes, quote, I always thought my father wished I was a boy, but by the time I was, it was too late, end quote. Becoming a parent himself only deepens Belk's inquiry into the fusion of parents whose bodies are homes and the children who became there, pulling apart the ways in which his relationship with Samson is different from Anna's relationship to their other two children, whom she carried in birth. Quote, it's hard to talk with you about who should have our next child without feeling like it's a selfish thing to do. Making a person whose history, even their body, will forever be entangled with yours, end quote. And it's true. We are forever entangled with our children, by DNA, by the cells left behind, and those carried forward, by experiences and moments and simple acts of support and love, like making sure the new pharmacist knows my child's name and pronouns. In our family, like in Belk's, quote, there is always a chance to redefine yourself, end quote. My kid is a young adult now, out in the world, and we've just transferred the testosterone prescription to a national chain pharmacy in their college town. The next time they need testosterone, they will stand alone in a pharmacy line like this one in a town that is even smaller than where they grew up. They already email their endocrinologist directly with questions and to schedule appointments or request refills. I am no longer part of the process, unless my kid wants me to be. And sometimes they do. Sometimes they want a break from answering questions about the facts of their body. Near the end of the book, Belk notes, quote, I'm often not the person I want to be, end quote. I'd venture to say that this is true for most everyone who is doing the work, seeking the place, shape, or voice that best represents who they are. The natural mother of the child is a testament to the diversity of the human experience. Belk's vulnerable, honest exploration of his relationship to his body is a brave and meaningful gift to readers, who will recognize themselves in many stories Belk commits to the page, and in his very human quest to live and love deeply and authentically. One of the things that I like best about this particular piece is the way the author roots the book review in personal narrative. Often we learn best through story, and by framing the essay in an anecdote, it's easier for the reader to follow along with Megan on this very complicated and sensitive journey. We can see her in the pharmacy line, and through descriptive word choice and vivid description, we can feel her anxiety as she now has to interact with someone new about this issue. Something as simple as filling a prescription can be a great source of turbulence, and this establishes conflict, which any engaging story needs. And through her anecdote, she creates parallels between the book she's reviewing and her own experience to up the stakes of the argument. This gives the piece a stronger sense of purpose. And juxtaposing them with the ideas in the text she's reviewing, she blurs the lines of narrative structure, thereby mirroring craft and content. So these are some of the things I like best about this particular piece. What strikes you about this piece or another piece by this author? Tell me in the comments below. This is a blog post by Mannewitz, and it's called Restaurant Customer Psychology. Understanding Customer Psychology in the Restaurant Industry. It was a popular trend on LinkedIn a few years back to call everything a hack. If your business grew rapidly, you would say you were a growth hacker. If you succeeded in the tech industry, you were a tech hacker. Rather than use fancy words, we'll call this for what it is. Leveraging customer psychology can increase lifetime value to your restaurant and provide a better guest experience. Every aspect of restaurants is influenced by customer psychology, from their initial feelings about your restaurant all the way up to the point where they have paid and left. The first impression, ambiance, and atmosphere. The first step in understanding customer psychology is recognizing the impact of a restaurant's ambiance. The moment a customer steps in, they subconsciously gauge the environment. Lighting, decor, and music create a sensory envelope that can either welcome or deter a patron. For instance, soft, warm lighting often creates a cozy and inviting atmosphere, encouraging customers to relax and spend more time and potentially more money. Moreover, the choice of colors and decor elements also play a vital role. Colors like red and yellow are known to stimulate appetite and are commonly used in fast food restaurants, while cooler colors like blue are less appetizing but can create a calm and upscale atmosphere. The restaurant's layout, including the seating arrangement and table spacing, impacts customers' comfort. An overcrowded space may feel chaotic and deter patrons seeking a more relaxed dining experience, while too much space can make a restaurant feel empty and uninviting. Menu design, the psychological playbook. A restaurant's menu is more than a list of dishes. It's a psychological playbook that guides customers' choices. The layout, color scheme, and typography are aesthetic choices and part of strategic menu design. Studies have shown that people generally read menus in a Z pattern. Placing high-profit items in these strategic spots can boost sales of specific dishes. Descriptive language also plays a crucial role. Adjectives that evoke taste, smell, and textures can tantalize the senses, nudging customers towards more profitable dishes. The way dishes are grouped and the sequence in which they appear on the menu can influence customer choices. Grouping high-margin items with less popular ones can improve the latter's visibility and sales. Also, offering a special selection for the chef's recommendations can guide customers towards specific dishes. A psychological trick here is to create a perception of quality and exclusivity, making those items more appealing. Pricing strategies, the magic of numbers. Pricing strategy is a subtle yet powerful tool in influencing customer behavior. The concept of charm pricing, where items are priced just below a round number, like $9.99 instead of $10, often leads customers to perceive the prices are significantly lower. Additionally, omitting the currency sign has been shown to reduce the customer's pain and pain, as it makes the price seem less like a monetary transaction. Another strategy involves using price anchoring. By placing a high-priced item at the top of the menu category, other items appear more reasonably priced in comparison, even if they are above the average cost. This technique subtly encourages diners to spend more than they might have originally intended, as their perception of value is skewed by the initial high price point. The power of choice, menu size, and variety. The paradox of choice is particularly relevant in the restaurant industry. A menu that is too broad can overwhelm customers, leading to decision fatigue, while a limited menu might not cater to diverse tastes. Finding the right balance is key. A moderately varied menu caters to different preferences without overburdening the decision-making process. It's also beneficial to categorize items clearly, helping customers navigate the menu more efficiently. Balancing the menu with a mix of familiar and exotic dishes can also cater to different customer personalities. While some diners seek comfort in classic, well-known dishes, others might be enticed by unique or adventurous culinary experiences. By offering a range from traditional to innovative, restaurants can appeal to a broader spectrum of customer preferences, enhancing the dining experience for a diverse clientele. Sensory marketing, encouraging the five senses. A holistic dining experience engages all five senses. The aroma of freshly baked bread, the sizzle of steak on the grill, the visual presentation of dishes all contribute to the overall experience. These sensory cues can evoke emotions and memories, deeply influencing customer satisfaction. For instance, the use of fresh ingredients can be emphasized through open kitchens or descriptions on the menu, appealing to the customer's desire for quality and freshness. In addition to taste and smell, the tactile aspect of dining, the cutlery feel, the linen's texture, and even the weight of the menu contribute to the overall sensory experience. Music and ambient sounds also play a critical role. The right music can enhance the dining experience, influencing the mood and even the perceived taste of food. Carefully selected playlists that complement the restaurant's theme and clientele can significantly enhance the dining atmosphere. Emotional connection, building brand loyalty. Creating an emotional connection with customers goes a long way in building brand loyalty. Personalized service, acknowledging regular customers, and responding to feedback can foster a sense of belonging and loyalty. Storytelling is another powerful tool. Sharing the story behind a dish or the restaurant's history can create a personal connection, making the dining experience more memorable. Restaurants can also build emotional connections through community engagement and social responsibility. Customers increasingly value businesses that contribute positively to society, whether it's sourcing ingredients locally, supporting charitable causes, or implementing sustainable practices. These actions resonate with customers and can create emotional bonds, encouraging repeat visits and word-of-mouth recommendations. The role of social proof and online reviews. In today's digital age, online reviews and social media play a pivotal role in shaping a restaurant's image. Positive reviews and social proof can significantly influence potential customers' dining choices. Restaurants need to manage their online presence actively, engaging with customers' feedback, and use social media to showcase their offerings and customer experiences. Encouraging satisfied customers to share their experiences online can be beneficial. Simple prompts or incentives for leaving a review can increase online presence. Responding promptly and professionally to both positive and negative reviews demonstrates the restaurant's commitment to customer satisfaction and can sway potential customers who read these interactions online. The impact of technology on dining behavior. Technology has revolutionized the dining experience, from online reservations to digital menus and contactless payment. Technology offers convenience and efficiency. However, it's essential to balance technological integration with human interaction, as the hospitality aspect of dining remains a critical component of customer satisfaction. The use of technology should enhance, not detract, from the dining experience. For instance, online reservation systems can reduce wait times and improve customer satisfaction, while digital menus can provide detailed information about dishes, including ingredients and allergens. However, technology should be used judiciously to ensure it doesn't replace the personal touch that is fundamental to the dining experience. Health-conscious and ethical eating. The growing trend of health-conscious and ethical eating significantly impacts customer choices. Restaurants that offer healthy, organic, or locally sourced options cater to this demographic, often leading to a loyal customer base. Transparency about ingredients and sourcing can also influence decision-making, as more customers prefer to make informed choices about their food. Moreover, showcasing a commitment to health and ethics can be a strong differentiator in a competitive market. Restaurants that highlight their use of fresh, organic ingredients or their partnerships with local farmers and suppliers can attract health-conscious and environmentally aware customers. Offering vegetarian, vegan, and gluten-free options not only caters to specific dietary needs, but also demonstrates a restaurant's commitment to inclusivity and customer care. Leveraging customer psychology. Understanding customer psychology is crucial in the ever-competitive restaurant industry. It's about creating an experience that resonates on a psychological level, from the moment a customer walks in to the presentation of the meal, and even after they leave. By focusing on these psychological aspects, restaurants can create memorable experiences that not only satisfy the palate, but also resonate emotionally, ensuring customers keep coming back for more. One of the things that I like best about this particular piece is the way it maintains a sense of focus. Psychology is a very broad and abstract concept, so it's quite easy for the focus to become derailed. And one of the ways that Trace combats this potential issue is by using subheadings. For example, one of his subheadings reads, "The First Impression, Ambiance and Atmosphere." Another reads, "Menu Design, the Psychological Playbook." And another, "Sensory Marketing, Engaging the Five Senses." Using effective and clear subheadings makes the very dense and abstract information Trace is trying to communicate a lot easier to digest and navigate. Using those subheadings, he also creates strong topic sentences that tells us what each paragraph and each subsection will be about, helping prepare the reader for what will be argued in that particular paragraph, which are also some of the things that he talked about in his interview. And he doesn't just leave these claims at an expository level. He incorporates storytelling features like vivid descriptions to make those abstract ideas more concrete for the reader. Essentially, Trace is making a mini argument in this blog post. So these are some of the things I like best about this particular piece. What strikes you about this piece or another piece by this author? Tell me in the comments below. This is called Grief as a Haunting, and it's from Human Wilderness by Amanda Passmore-Ott, and this is her first chapbook. Grief is a Haunting. Grief is a haunting of mid-June, wilting to high summer, and endless rounds of deadheading irises, and placing Dixie cups half filled with beer to keep slugs at bay. Clouds break their swollen tongues against the ridge. Specks of graphite fall where I might capture a curve of lip meeting a laugh line. Imagine pressure of your fingers balanced like kindling on his shoulder. How many times I've watched the rewind of Finch propelled by some ghost against the downburst, the mumbled grace of leaf shiver, and only watchword, and after air so thick you could drown in the visible breath of fog gathering under hanging baskets and tangled cages of blackberry. A taste so tart it stings. One of the things that I really like about this poem is the way that Amanda takes two abstractions, grief and haunting, to construct a metaphor that creates a kind of mini argument in the poem. And the way that she does this is through coupling sound and imagery. So, for example, she opens with wilting, mid-June wilting to high summer. So how does that demonstrate the way that grief behaves as a haunting? When we think of wilting, and even with the sound of the word, we think of a slow dissolve, that this is something that takes time. And even the word wilting takes time for us to get through. So even through sound, we're getting a suggestion of this is a way in which grief behaves. It behaves like a slow dissolve. It takes us a while to get through it, that there is a kind of wilting aspect to it. And then that's complicated with deadheading irises. That act of deadheading, again, takes us a while to get through, so we understand that there's a bit of a process, but it also hangs heavy in the mouth with the heavy sounds of dead and heading. And even further down in the poem, when we're moving toward the end, she incorporates leaf shiver, suggesting a behavior that's brief and slight, which goes to support the poem title's thesis, essentially, that this is another way in which grief can behave. Brief and slight, kind of quick. And then we end with a taste so tart it stings, suggesting that there's a kind of sharpness to grief, that it can manifest in a sharp, quick fashion. And we know that that kind of sharp sting can sometimes produce an ache. So these are some of the things that I like best about this poem. What strikes you about this piece or another piece by this author? Tell me in the comments below. I'll be reading 2 chapters from Anne Claycomb's fiction novel Silenced. It's about 4 women who are sexually assaulted by the CEO of their company, and the CEO curses them so that they can't tell their stories. And the first chapter that I'm going to read takes place at a cafe where 3 of the 4 women have met. Up until this point, they've been living in isolation with their curses. They've gone through the process of identifying each other. The 4th woman is not yet present. We haven't yet met her, but the girls have had some contact with her through text. August 8th, Ranjani. Joe, Ranjani said, do you know Maya English in IT? She heard her voice rise and turned the statement into a question, but couldn't help it. This would be so much easier to explain if Joe knew Maya. But Joe clearly didn't recognize the name. Is she the one who sent me that text? Why, and how does she know? Ebony stood up. I need to use the restroom, she said. Ronnie, keep talking. I've heard this part. She strode away before either of them could protest. But not that Ranjani would have done so. If she'd just told the whole horrible story of what the CEO had done to her, she'd have needed to lock herself in the bathroom stall and make sure the key was still white. Then splash cold water on her face and let it run over her wrists, as her mother had taught her to do whenever she got anxious as a child. 2 weeks ago, before they went to the police station together, Ranjani would have sworn that Ebony not only never revealed that kind of weakness, she didn't even feel it. But having seen Ebony withdraw, Ranjani knew better now. Ebony gave a lot more detail when she told her story this time. She said to Joe, I knew the basics, but not how bad the withdrawal symptoms were, or how much money she's actually spending. Yeah, those numbers are terrifying. There's no way she can keep fighting without completely wrecking her finances. That was exactly what Ranjani was thinking, and yet she wondered if they had the same attitude toward Ebony's situation. Ranjani wanted to beg her to stop trying to report the CEO, to take care of herself instead. It sounded like Joe, on the other hand, admired Ebony's the hell with it determination. Joe reached for her latte. So tell me about Maya English from IT and the text messages. Is she the one who told you to talk to me? Because I got that text from her more than a week ago. Yes, Ranjani said. And she wants to explain some stuff to us, but we'll have to meet at her house. Why? I don't think she can leave. She started working from home at the end of January, really suddenly. Like she went home on a Friday and she hasn't been back to the office since. Ah, Joe set her coffee cup down. Her too. Ranjani nodded. So more than 6 months ago, Joe said thoughtfully. Then 2 months later, Ebony was assaulted, and 2 months after that, you were. If I didn't know better, I'd say there was a pattern. Ranjani noticed that Joe didn't mention her own assault. She still hadn't even acknowledged that it happened, or the fact that the timing of it made the pattern even more obvious. Ranjani pressed on, trying to explain as much as she could before Ebony got back so that hopefully they could call Maya then. They'd been sitting at this table for nearly an hour, and she was starting to worry about time. Her mother's confusion and anxiety got much more pronounced later in the day. The doctor called it sunsetting, and Ranjani not being there made things even worse. She was letting Joe read their text thread when Ebony slipped back into her seat. Joe handed Ranjani back her phone. So Maya knows what and why, but not how, Joe said. And she's talking about curses, magic. Is that what she's suggesting? Like witchcraft or sorcery? Is she into that sort of thing? Not really, Ranjani said. I mean, she's a Comic-Con nerd. That's what it's called, right? She's obsessed with the Joker's girlfriend from Batman. Joe laughed. Harley Quinn? So she's a lesbian? No, Ranjani said, confused. I've met her husband. Ebony cut in. Listen, Joe, she said. I want to hear what Maya has to say. If she's discovered a pattern, then maybe we can prevent other women from getting hurt. Joe looked thoughtful. I guess I want to hear what she has to say too, she said, including what exactly he did to her and why she couldn't tell Ranjani over text. She returned to Ranjani. You haven't told me what happened to you either. Ranjani's hand went instinctively to the chain around her throat. Don't be a bitch, Joe, Ebony said. Did you try to report him? I tried once, Ranjani said. Once was enough. But nothing bad happened when you told Ebony? Ranjani's fingers twisted around her necklace. I didn't exactly tell Ebony. She got it out of me. But when she shot a glance at Ebony. When we tried to report him together, we couldn't. And when you talked to Maya over text, you told her too? You saw the text, Ranjani said. She already knew. I don't think I'm saying this right, Joe said. My point is, you can tell people what happened to you, right? The way Ebony just told us. You can say the words out loud to anyone you like, so long as you're not talking to, what, a cop? A doctor? Any mandatory reporter? Actually, Ebony said dryly, I am a mandatory reporter. Ironic, isn't it? I could get fired for not reporting what he's done to us. You think that's ironic? Joe sneered, or tried to. Her face betrayed her, crumpling with self-loathing and fear. Joe had beautiful bone structure and a deeply austere attractiveness. But in that moment, her cheeks hollowed out, and she reminded Ranjani of a comic book character. All shadows and exaggerated lines conveying extreme emotion. You know something more ironic, Joe? Ebony asked, but gently, not pushing this time. Yes, Joe said. The fact that even if I wanted to tell you what happened to me, I wouldn't. I couldn't. This is what happens when I try. She drew in a shaky breath and then blurted out what Ranjani had braced herself to hear. The CEO raped me 12 days ago in his office. Except that she didn't. When Joe opened her mouth, instead of speaking, she vomited out a black substance that heaved and hung in the air before settling on the table and starting to spread. Ranjani flung herself backwards and pressed her hands to her mouth. So nauseated she was afraid she might throw up herself. Ebony leapt off her chair, cursing. A woman at another table screamed. An employee passing with a laden tub of dirty dishes said, Jesus, what the actual fuck? Dropped the tub with a crash and backed inside. Joe wiped her mouth. Fuck, she said. Sorry. Her face crumpled into what Ranjani first thought was another spasm of vomiting, but turned out to be tears instead, which Joe immediately hid behind her hands. In the shocked, silent aftermath, Ranjani tried to avoid even glancing at the table. She turned instead toward Ebony, but Ebony was looking at the table, her eyes wide in horror, and Ranjani could hear the tabletop buzzing. She made herself look. The glistening black stuff that had spilled from Joe's mouth was resolving itself into a seething mass of tiny black flies. They stumbled over and around each other, then seemed to all remember at once that they could fly. They swirled up in a cloud that pitched itself first at Ebony, who stumbled into the chair behind her as she beat them off, then at Ranjani, who threw her arms up to protect her head. When she dared peek, she saw the cloud dispersing as it gained altitude and moved away, until the flies were just individual insects, specks in the air, and then they were gone. The woman who had screamed had been sitting alone. She bolted from the patio, her tote bag banging against her hip as she ran. Those at other tables who'd heard the commotion but hadn't seen anything looked at their group for a minute and then, with nearly the same synchronicity as the flies had displayed, went back to their drinks, their conversations, their laptops. Ebony took a step back towards her chair, though she didn't sit down. Joe. Shut up, Joe said from behind her hands. Then she lifted her wet face and glared at Ebony. I tried to tell you. Why is it that you and Ronnie can get the words out, but I can't? What the hell does that mean? Ebony shook her head and said nothing. Over her shoulder, Ranjani saw the employee who dropped his tray returning, accompanied by a man who she guessed was the manager. Everything all right here, ladies? He asked. Joe tensed like a runner in the starting blocks. Ranjani put her hand lightly against Joe's back. A bug flew into our friend's mouth, she said. She's fine, but could we get a glass of water, please? Of course, the manager said, but I thought... He scanned their table, the ground around it, and then turned back to the server. Sir, I swear there was this whole... And he gestured at the table and then at Joe, who was looking at a fixed point straight ahead of her. Ebony stepped directly into the manager's line of sight. In her heels, she was taller than he was. She nearly swallowed a bug, she said crisply. And she's allergic to bees, so we're all understandably extremely upset. She coughed it out, and it was just a fly, but she turned to address the young server, whose forehead was crinkling as he tried to make this recital of events match his own memory of what he'd seen. It was pretty scary for a minute there. We appreciate you coming out to check on us, Ranjani said. A glass of cold water really would be helpful. Of course. And no ice, please. Absolutely. And we'll get this whole area picked up shortly. The manager motioned for the server to pick up the trash he dropped, then hurried inside and brought Joe back a glass of water himself. I'm surprised you don't have measures in place to keep bugs off the patio area, Ebony said as she sat down again. This incident was just a nuisance, but it would have been terrible if our friend had been stung. The manager assured them all that he would personally look into that sort of thing, though of course it was difficult to keep insects away from open-air spaces, and they didn't want to spray because they serve food here. Finally, he trailed off and left them. Joe picked up the glass of water and gulped half of it. You two just gaslit those poor men, she said without inflection. Yep, Ebony said. You want me to go in and apologize? No, Joe said. Some color was coming back into her cheeks. She slanted a look at Ranjani. No ice? Ranjani bit back a sudden mad urge to giggle. It just came out. Good thing too, Joe said. After I've spit out a swarm of bugs, the last thing I want is ice. Once they'd all started laughing, they couldn't stop. Ranjani gave in to her giggles, clutching her stomach. Joe kept trying to drink more water and sputtering before she could get it down. Ebony would get herself under control, look at Joe, and double over again. Ranjani couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like this. It wasn't just laughing in general. It was this laughter, irresistible, because you knew it was inappropriate, and intoxicating, because if you'd stopped laughing, you might cry. Finally, Ebony wiped her eyes and sat up straight in her chair. So that's what happens whenever you try to talk about what he did to you. Joe drank the rest of her water. Also, when I try to curse out, she paused to swallow and then continued carefully. People who might hypothetically have done certain things I don't like. So you can't talk back to your television? Joe half smiled. Exactly. And it happened even with us, Ranjani said. Does it happen when you're alone? Yeah. Ranjani checked her phone. She had maybe 15 minutes more before she needed to call Amit and tell him she was going to be late, and saw the text thread with Maya still up on the screen. Wait, she said. That's got to be true for Maya, too. That must have been what she meant. I don't understand it, but here. She scrolled to find the text and read it aloud. Just be aware that I think her curse is like mine, not yours. It's constant, not on a trigger. Let's go see her, Joe said. Text her now. Tell her we're willing to come hear what she has to say. When? This weekend? Hell, I'd rather get it over with, Ebony said. I could do tomorrow night after work. Me too. Ranjani knew that if she told Amit she had a late design meeting, he'd take care of everything at home without question. She'd bring him his favorite takeout to make up for it, and deal with the sick plunge in her stomach at telling him the lie later. Tomorrow then, Joe said. It doesn't sound like Maya's got a busy social calendar. Ranjani texted Maya and got a thumbs up reply almost immediately. I've got to go, she told the other women. I'm sorry, but I really do. Go, Ebony said. Let's meet in the parking garage tomorrow at 5. That way you can drive. Can't we just take the metro? Joan asked. No. Ranjani and Ebony said at the same time. Right. Ranjani still had to tell Joe about the key and all the doors she couldn't pass through. I can't, she said miserably. Not now. I can't. Ranjani didn't wait for a reply to look back as she left the patio. Once in her car, she turned on music as loud as she could stand it for the whole ride home. She needed to not think about everything she had learned this afternoon or about what she had committed herself to for the next day. She needed to see her mother's face light up when she walked into the house, with a relief so pure it might have been joy. She needed to put her arms around Emmett and feel his tightening around her, so that her head rested on his chest and his breath stirred her hair as he breathed her in. Fairy Tales Forever Discord channel. We are an inclusive community. We celebrate all voices and identities, expressions of hate, bias, or general assholery. Yes, we know it's not a word. Will not be tolerated. For full channel rules and guidelines, click here. Discussion boards. Fairy Tale of the Day. Question of the Day. Fairy Tales for Our Time. Question of the Day. What's going on with Bluebeard? Just read it for the first time and I'm so confused. Submitted by Tiff with an E, member since 2017. Tiff with an E. Hey, FTF community. Thanks for helping me with this one. I'm writing a paper on fairy tale tropes, including rules in fairy tales and what happens when you break them. The Bluebeard story is making my head hurt. If you haven't read it, at Jenny K submitted it as an FTOTD here. My question is, are we actually supposed to think the wife deserves what happens to her? Because I definitely do not, but I feel like the story says she does. Natalie. Oh, you are not wrong. There are so many fairy tales where people get in trouble for doing the one thing they weren't supposed to do. Go off the path in the forest, talk to strangers, stay out past curfew, and this reads just like those. You have to stop and really just go. Wait, a guy whose wives have all disappeared and never been found tells someone not to go into a certain room, and when they do it, and they find the dead bodies, they deserve to get in trouble. Hello. Serial killers get off on power. We shouldn't be taking orders from them. Tack what? The sick thing about the story is to think about his whole signature as a killer. And yeah, I know I watch way too much Criminal Minds. But play it out. He kills his first wife, panics, and hides her body in the house. But he got off on it, and now he wants to kill again. So he gets another wife, tricks her into discovering the first wife's body, and then kills her because he has to because she disobeyed. And then he just hits repeat on this pattern and gets away with it. Jess. The magical key that gets covered in blood that then won't wash off is a nice touch, I guess. But you don't even need it for the story to basically be a serial killer horror story with some blame the victim shit added. Angel of the House. Yeah, the bloody key is super creepy, but what I hate is that the wife is sort of set up to be at fault because she married him for money, which women had to do back then just to survive. And also because she disobeys him by opening the door he told her not to open. There's a reading on this at Tiff with an E about how scared the patriarchy was, and is, about women not doing exactly what they're told, and that's why so much bad shit happens to women in fairy tales when they break a rule. Jenny K. Absolutely. I want to point out that the whole thing about the husband's blue beard is almost certainly coded racist language, suggesting that the character is non-white. A lot of the male villains in fairy tales are coded as non-white, either in the text or the illustrations. And that's certainly not okay. But talking about sexism, not racism here, my thing with Bluebeard is that the limits on women are really right in your face because of the door. In the story, it's a literal door hiding the dead wives. But I think about the metaphor. Unlocking a door means opening up new possibilities, new potential, new choices. Tiff with an E. This is amazing. Not the icky stuff in Bluebeard, but what you all are saying. Thanks for helping me think through this story. It really felt to me like she was a prisoner in the castle as soon as he left her alone there, even though she had this key, because it doesn't seem like she has any way to leave and there's no one else there. It feels so creepy, and like, of course, you want to open the door you couldn't open because you just felt so trapped. Jess. And then the key getting permanently stained with blood is so obviously an indictment of her. Like, if you want to escape the confines set out for you, we're going to make sure you're marked forever. Natalie. Shiver. Click to see more comments. So some of the things that I like best about this particular story is the way that the author layers multiple narratives to illustrate the power of narrative, but also to call attention to this very real contemporary social issue. And sets up each chapter where we're focused on the specific women as sort of like a calendar. So the first chapter I read was August 8th, Ranjani. So imagine we're looking at Ranjani's calendar on August 8th. And we follow these women for a little bit more than a month. Anne is also disrupting that pattern she set up with the calendar by incorporating forum posts from a Discord channel. In this case, it would be Fairy Tales Forever Discord channel. And we're moving throughout the text in this way, jumping between the calendar stories and the posts on the Discord channel. And in the first chapter I read, the women have been dealing with their curses on their own in isolation. And this is the first time we see it happening in public, and the public has to react. And I think the way that she deals with that mimics how people sort of begin to rationalize when they've witnessed something that they have trouble digesting. When Joe pukes up these bugs and these insects that become flies, and it creates something chaotic in their environment, the other people at the restaurant rationalize what happened. So when Ebony provides an alternate narrative of what happened, everyone else just sort of accepts it, even though it doesn't quite make sense to what they've witnessed. And this mimics the dismissal that we see in contemporary society when women share their story of sexual assault. There might be a kind of dismissal or a rush to rationalize what happened. And I think this is a really strong parallel that prepares us for the rest of the text. And in that moment, I think this is one of the first instances where we see the women who have been victimized starting to take control of the narrative, because the waiter and the manager who are directly engaging with them start to accept that story. So now maybe the women themselves don't begin to recognize this yet, but the reader begins to recognize how important that movement is in that moment when they start to take charge of their story. And then that is immediately disrupted when we get that post from the Discord. And looking at those fairy tales like Bluebeard might tell us something important about Ranjini or Ronnie's curse. And then we also have other women speaking about this who maybe aren't directly affected by the CEO's curse. But the posters in the Discord, they begin to recognize and voice the problematic nature for women in these fairy tales and the very real social consequences of that. So this sort of becomes the chorus. We see a sense of allyship and support. So these are some of the things that I like best about this particular piece. What strikes you about this piece or another piece by this author? Tell me in the comments below. The Witching Hour is a dinner theater performance, so I'm not able to show you the play itself, but with permission from Sock and Buskin Theater Company, I can show you some images from the production and provide a brief summary of the play that doesn't give away the ending. So let's pop into it.
The Witching Hour is a murder mystery comedy set in Salem, Massachusetts on Halloween. The holiday has brought customers into the Spirited Healing Center, but the owners, the Grimoire sisters, Athena, Hazel, and Lorelei, have been struggling financially for months. Once very magical witches, it seems they've lost their touch. Hilarious antics ensue as the sisters and their niece, Miranda, navigate angry customers, difficult choices, and the ultimate sacrifice.
A couple of the things that I really like best about this play is the character development and the scenario. So magical realism versus reality. So the basic premise of this is that we, the audience, are in the Spirited Healing Center run by these three sister witches. We're there to see Lorelei, who is bookish and analytical, Athena, who is a calming voice of reason, and Hazel, who's all about financial realities. And they are also joined by Miranda, their niece. She's there to learn from the sisters, from her aunts, but she also acts as a liaison between the audience. As all of these things are going on, and we're watching things crumble around the sisters, Miranda doesn't want these potential clients, i.e. the audience, to leave. So she's trying to placate them. She's trying to reassure the audience that things are going to be fine and there's nothing to worry about. Hazel's called a business investor to try to help them work through their financial difficulties to salvage their business. And Athena has an old friend coming from high school who's now broken into rehabilitating witches. But then Draco, a former lover of one or more of the sisters, has offered to help them out of financial ruin through his own means. None of these characters are wholly good or wholly bad, and a lot of them have relatively good intentions, and this is what makes it difficult to pin down the murderer, but not so difficult that the audience gets frustrated or feels tricked. And although this play capitalizes on magical elements and magical features, it's still a familiar situation. We don't need a magical element to help us understand the realities of a failing business, but adding in that magical element makes those social elements that get addressed in the play more digestible, i.e. trying to change someone to better conform to societal expectations, the complicated nature of trying to have a conversation with someone who doesn't even think you should exist. So these are some of the things that I like best about this particular play. What strikes you about this piece or another piece by this author? Tell me in the comments below. Thank you to all of the writers who participated in the series this year for donating the most precious thing any of us have, time. Thank you to Logan Venderlich for creating original music for the series. And thank you to everyone who likes, comments, subscribes, and of course, everyone who watches. That's it for this video. See you, love you, bye!